Anybody who can run on 2 broken legs and a pulled groin for 4 miles, you get another shot at this. I waited 8 weeks and started over, and this time I finished. There's a lot to unpack in that story, and there goes into great detail in the book. And one particular story that actually changed my life. Everybody who goes through BUD/S has a life-changing moment. There's some time in there that not everybody's strong at everything. It's either swimming, running, obstacle course, whatever it is. You have to get over that thing that is holding you back. And mine was
David Brown. Welcome to Titans of Transition. You just came out with a very interesting book. Why don't we start there, David? Tell us about the book that you just published, and Goliath.
Thanks so much, Joe. It's a really pleasure to be here today and talk about a whole bunch of different things. We're going to start with the book, and Goliath. It's a memoir, so it's about me. I get that question so many times. What's your book about? And it's odd to say, it's about me. But the way it came about was I had retired from the federal government after 28 years in law enforcement, and I was also a Navy SEAL for 7 years. And I had a lot of stories to tell. It seemed like people were interested in my stories. And I was questioning my own existence at the time. I was transitioning from being super active special agent and as federal executive into being a retired person. And I was unsettled. I couldn't understand why I couldn't go fishing and relax like everyone else who was going into retirement. And so I did it. Since I'm a federal agent and investigator, I started investigating myself, and I put my stories together, and I tried to answer the question, why am I the person that I am, and how did I become this way? And that ended up being the book. And it's very cathartic for me to write these things down, get personal with myself and with people, the readers. And I think people are relating to the story.
That's pretty powerful when you unpack your life story like that. And I think a lot of people go through that kind of introspection. It's interesting that you went and utilized your investigative practices to dig in and to find out what was going on inside. I think that it's quite interesting how you became a SEAL and how you went from that into being a special investigator. Special agent, I should say. Sorry about that. And you had some challenges going through that process as well. So I think that might have informed part of your book.
And I think that's what resonates with so many people, is that my journey to becoming a Navy SEAL and beyond was very different than I would say most people. The title, and Goliath, implies my name is David. So it is a David and Goliath story, not just in me tackling the giant, but I am small. I'm a small person. When I went into the Navy, I was 110 pounds and I was 5'3", and not typically what you would picture as the Navy SEAL package. Before I went into the Navy, I went to the Navy recruiter and said, this is what I want to do. And of course he said, there's no way you're going to be able to do that. You're too small. And so people reading this story are like, wow, I remember when these people doubted me. And pretty much people have doubted me my whole life, mostly because of my size. But what they didn't understand was what was inside, not what I looked like from the outside.
Right.
And so when I got to boot camp and passed the Navy SEAL screening test, the only one in boot camp to do it, and then I surprised a lot of people. And then I got to what's called BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolitions SEAL Training. As I was checking in, the guy at the desk looked down at me and he said, can I help you? And I told him my name. And he said, oh, you're AWOL, absent without leave. You're going to jail, buddy. And I was like, what? How could that be? I'm 3 weeks early. And he said, you're Dave Brown, reporting in for Special Boat Unit, aren't you? I said, no, I'm here for SEAL training. And he looked, he cocked his head and he laughed. He said, there can't be, there's no way. You're never gonna make it. All these guys are really big and muscular, and you're not. And that began my journey in Coronado, California, to become a Navy SEAL. And it took me 2 classes, a lot of injury, 2 broken legs to get through training. But I did make it. And it's a story in and of itself. I don't know how much you want to go into that story, but I can certainly talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, why don't we swing back to
Okay.
that and stay at the 50,000-foot level because you were in the SEALs, you said, for 7 years. Is that
Correct.
right? Yeah, and then how did you transition into becoming a special agent? That's an interesting
Um,
transition.
a very interesting story as well. As in 1987, when I was in the Navy, we weren't at war with anyone, and so there wasn't really much going on. So, as being a Navy SEAL means you practice to go to war when you're not at war. And we were, I spent a lot of time overseas traveling, and I don't want to say practicing, but basically pretending to be a warrior, jumping out of airplanes, blowing things up, riding on submarines. And it came to a point where I didn't see me being able to use the skills I was trained to do. My personality is such that I need a challenge. And it's hard to say, but SEAL team was no longer a challenge for me. And so I got my degree, and I decided I was, instead of being Jacques Cousteau with a machine gun, I was going to carry a gun and wear a suit in my next career. And so I went to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and applied for them. And almost within the next 10 days, I had an acceptance letter and an offer to go to Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy. And that's how I started my
Wow.
federal agent career. And I spent 7 years with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And again, I had that feeling, that restlessness. I think a lot of people in their careers, they like, where do I go from here once they feel that they've peaked? And the job work I was doing with NCIS wasn't as exciting as I wanted it to be. And so I looked into the Environmental Protection Agency, which was the flavor of the month for crime at the time. And ended up being probably my most exciting special agent work that I did for the 28 years.
Certainly everyone's heard of NCIS with the popularity of the television program that went on for many seasons, but I never heard about environmental protection. So can you tell us a little bit about that? What the tie-in was with that in
It
NCIS?
It is shocking for people when I tell them I worked for the Environmental Protection Agency Criminal Investigation Division, and I did undercover work,
Yeah.
and I bought and sold hazardous waste, and we did search warrants. No one ever imagined that this was going on in the United States and at the level that we were doing, especially I was doing it. And so I was in St. Louis, which, I'm going to say this affectionately, is one of the dirtiest cities in the country as far as environmental goes. There's a
Yeah.
lot of blue collar industry. There's lead smelting, there's metal fabrication, there's plating, chrome plating, and all these
Yeah.
industries are extremely dirty. And at the time, in the 1980s, the environmental laws were just really getting some teeth into them. And we were setting the example for the country. My office was setting the example as to how to do these investigations and what I would say environmental crime really was. One of the most significant cases I did was against Burlington Northern Railroad, Fortune 500 company, who had polluted an entire county, ruined the lives of many people from poisoning them with lead by dumping it all over the county from their rail car cleaning facility. And that ended up being a big deal and set the standard as to how we were going to attack environmental crime for big industries. EPA CID is a very small organization. At the time, it was only 120 special agents across the entire country. So we had to be very selective as the investigations we worked and the prosecutions that we had, because they were the first ones to be done in the United States, and they set a precedent.
Oh, that's really interesting. And there's a little bit of a crossover in a sense between us in that regard, because around that time, late 80s, early 90s, I was working for an environmental testing firm, a national chain of laboratories. My background's in science, although I was leading information technology at the time, but doing a lot of low-level testing. And there was a real ramp up in the regulations. And so that birthed the whole industry in order to do the monitoring side. But the idea that companies would actually intentionally dump waste where they knew they shouldn't, or that could happen, was something that I guess we didn't really have the, as you said, awareness of at the time, for sure. So that's fascinating. But it's another example where, just to use your words, in terms of your journey, you needed to see a challenge. Most people think to themselves, David, that someone goes in and makes it through buds, becomes a SEAL, regardless of their size, that they have reached some kind of a pinnacle of achievement. But then if you add to that your size and that physical challenge that you had that was over and above what many have, and we all know it's not just the physicality, it's also what's going on in here, it's what's inside. But then being in the SEALs for 7 years, realizing that I guess you really wanted to see action, you decided to make another shift and challenge yourself. And then after you were in NCIS for a period of time, the nature of their work wasn't, again, I'm extrapolating here, it wasn't to the degree of challenge that really satisfied you. So then you stepped off and made another transition. I'm sensing a theme there, that you want to make a difference, you want to challenge yourself, and you wanted to achieve more. Am I reading that right?
You're absolutely right. And my challenge in writing the book was to try to figure out, why the heck am I like this? Most people would, and a lot of my friends even with the SEAL teams and the organizations I work for, they were perfectly happy once they reached their goal, which maybe it was a SEAL, maybe it was a special agent in a particular organization. They were satisfied. They wrote out their entire career in that organization doing that thing. And I never felt done. I didn't feel done. I had got the certificates. I graduated with the class. I achieved the prosecutions. And still in my life, I felt like I wasn't successful. And I had to examine that. Why do I feel like that? Even though by most people's standards, I was very successful, but it wasn't in my own mind. And that's where I had to go with the book, is to examine, why are people the way they are? And you had pointed to the fact that I wasn't satisfied and I needed, let's just say, the thrill of the action. And it's true. What I found in doing my research, in one of the psychologists that I was doing research on, as far as personality goes, he coined a phrase, pathological persistence. And I
haven't ever heard that one before.
Yes, and
Good.
I'm trying to think of his name, and I'll think of it in a second. But basically what he's saying, and he used an example of a man his name was Doba, who was a Swede. And Doba was persistent at what he was doing. He was so persistent that he decided he was going to kayak across the Atlantic Ocean. But it wasn't enough for Doba to do it once. He had to do it 3 times. And then you would think that was the end of his life. He had paddled across the Atlantic 3 times. But he moved on to the next thing, which was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And there he had a heart attack on top of the mountain. And so what the psychologist basically said was, and what Doba said was, my life wasn't to paddle across the Atlantic. My life was to complete the next challenge, to complete the next phase of my life, never to rest and to move on to the next thing. And that's fit my example ideally, because that is the way I live. And that's the way what's pushed me through my life is, it's not that I have a choice. I have to do these things. It's bred into me. It's genetic.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. And then you went, as we started this discussion, you then left that last job. And was it a retirement transition at that point?
I went from EPA to the Department of Interior, Office of Inspector General, and I became this special agent in charge, and which was a completely, even though I was a special agent, now it was different because I was managing an area of operation, quarter of the planet, from Guam to Alaska to Arizona to Montana to all of the West Coast. So I asked for a challenge and I got it.
As you were talking about that pathological, what was it? Pathological persistence. I was reminded of a quote. The measure of a man is what stops him. And of course, him or her, it could be woman. I don't know who that would be attributed to, but I remember that in growing up, hearing that a lot. And that kind of reminds me of this pathological persistence concept. that you're always looking for more of a challenge to test your measure, if you will, and not be afraid of something brand new. And even though there was a common thread in these last few positions you held in investigations and being special agent type of mode, there was always something new that you hadn't done. And this last one sounded like it was a management role, if I'm understanding appropriately.
It was a management role in a organization and a job description that was so diverse, it was hard to even put into words, from
Very
investigating
broad.
Native American tribes to the political corruption in Guam or American Samoa, and oil leases in Alaska, and water theft. Water is gold in the West. Water theft from the Bureau of Reclamation in
Just about
it was everything,
all over the
anything and
map.
everything. And so
Literally.
the learning curve was great, and it was challenging. And I really loved that I met president from the Federated States of Micronesia and sat as he chewed betel nut, spit into a can, and sat with
Back to survival skills there.
as I was negotiating the ability for our special agents to carry our weapons in their country, because they're free associated states. There's not even actually the United States. There was that type of challenges that State Department would normally do, and law enforcement and liaison. And it was so much fun. It was a lot of travel, and it was an amazing adventure that I got to do something completely different in a topic that I knew a lot about.
And so what was there a next transition? I'm trying to figure out where the book came in.
Yeah. And by the way, I remembered his name. Robert Hill is the psychologist that wrote the article in Psychology Today on pathological persistence. And so there I was in a career, and I was reaching the 35-year mark working for the federal government. And I just said that was enough. I didn't want to work for the federal government anymore. I wanted to do something completely different. And so I retired. Some people would say I was crazy. I was a senior executive. I could travel freely. I was in charge of a program and an organization, communication, in charge of communication for an entire organization. I shouldn't have walked away, but I did. It's better to walk away when you're on top, as the saying goes.
Yeah, that's true.
So I left, I retired, and oddly enough, I started acting in community theater, which was completely opposite of anything I had.
This is just amazing. You get to a point, and I don't know if the word boredom makes any sense, but it gets to a point where, like, I need a new challenge.
It was, and I am an introvert. I'm not comfortable with going out in front of an audience, but it was something I needed to do. I think people avoid those challenges. They're afraid of the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And that's what stops people from going to the next level in their life or moving on to that next position, is they're comfortable in where they are. And for me, the uncomfortableness is a motivator for me, which is, maybe it's odd to some people, but I get afraid. I get scared of things, and I don't want to do it. One side of me says, don't do this because you've never done it before, and you may not achieve what you're trying to do. And the other side of me is saying, you have to do this. You have to go out and do something different. You won't be satisfied with your life unless you keep moving forward, or maybe sideways sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's come up. I think I've done over 50 interviews since I started this channel. I've done some other episodes, and this is one of the things, the fear of failure has come up so often, and I'm not surprised by that, but people that I engaged with on this podcast have often cited that as a key learning for them to make progress in their lives and to find fulfillment and to fully come into their own, if I can use that language, is looking at it and pushing through it. It's the old thing that people think courage is lack of fear, and that's not true, is it? It's like pushing yourself through the fear in order to get beyond it to something better on the other side, or to the outcome you need.
Fear keeps you alive. It did when I was with SEAL team and
Right.
being a special agent. You're cautious. That doesn't mean you don't
Yeah.
progress and don't move forward. You always, the other thing SEAL team taught me was complete the mission at all costs. And so while everybody, when you're getting ready to jump out of an airplane at night into the ocean, of course, if anybody tells you they're not afraid, then they're lying because
They're lying.
everyone is afraid it to some level. But the fact that you have the confidence in yourself and you're going to come out the other
Through
side,
training.
that's is what you're describing is the ability to push through that fear, courage.
Yeah, absolutely. So the typical question, and we don't have to end here, but it just seemed like the natural place to ask it is, of course, we want everyone to read your book, to get it and to read it, because it's a fascinating story and I think a real model to folks on how to achieve more in their lives. But the other thing that I often ask is advice. It's the old, what advice would you give yourself if you were to your younger self, or what lessons learned would you want others to really take away from this conversation? And if they want deeper context and additional, of course, get the book. But how would you answer that question? What are the key learnings and lessons that you would want others to hear?
For myself, and I think other people would feel the same way as the reviews on my book and people who've contacted me said, this is what they're taking away from it is that success is defined, should be defined by your own self. I went for 34 years with the definition of success as everyone else looking at me and saying whether I did something or I didn't do something, whether I got the certificate or whether I got the grade. And that's what left me at the end of my career in retirement, looking back, judging myself by everybody else. And I think one of the key takeaways to the book is don't allow other people to judge you in your abilities. And you need to be the biggest judge of whether you can do something or whether you're successful. And that the other thing is, for as much as hard work as you're going to do, and this is what I didn't do, and this is why I was unsettled, is I never stopped to smell the roses. I never once looked at the actual certificate or looked at myself or stopped and said, am I successful? And just be happy in the moment. And I know that's getting philosophical to actually live in the moment. And I never did that. I was always chasing something. And you can never be happy if you're constantly chasing something every single day. And so if I could do it all again, when I graduated from Buds to be a SEAL, I would have got with my friends and we would have had a celebration, but I didn't do that. And when I became a special agent and achieved certain things, I would have taken my family on vacation or maybe gone to Disneyland or something. And I didn't do that. And so I led a life of constantly chasing what other people thought of me would be successful. So that's the key takeaway. And it seems odd based on what I just said, why would a person who's done all these things, why would he say, okay, you need to slow down instead of speeding up? But that's my advice.
Yeah, it being so driven, and I think in society today, in a lot of individuals' lives, they are driven like that, and they don't take the time. And we've all heard stories of the fabulously successful, wealthy individuals that are approaching their own death, looking back and said, I should have spent more time with my family. I should have slowed down and smelled the roses, to your point. So, but somehow we hear those stories, but we tend to keep driving and pushing. And I believe there is this void or this gap in the deepest part of people that they're trying to fill. And unless they do the deep work like you have to try to have that inner conversation and try to really understand what's going on inside, you can get on autopilot and just a little bit on the hamster wheel. I'm using so many metaphors here. That you don't take time, and pretty soon decades have passed. And so that's just a great learning, great reminder.
Yeah. And we talk about the reasons I wrote the book, and I didn't even realize why or what the outcome of the book was going to be. I knew I had these stories to tell and I needed to weave them together with a purpose. And that's really what it is all about. And when I was done with the book, I felt very satisfied that I could now engage and still take advantage of my personality, but at the same time, enjoy the moment. And so my life is much better now. I'm actually a happy person. Uh, I don't know. A lot of people could say, "Are you happy?" And you say, and they just
Yeah.
truly say yes. But I can really say that this revelation for me and just a little change of perspective in life. And so now I'm a very happy person.
That's great. Yeah. Being grateful for what you have and being grateful for what you've experienced and your progress through this journey of life. Gratitude is a big part of arriving at that state of happiness or joy or fulfillment, whatever word you want to use. I'm curious, you were talking, I'm going to swing back now early in your journey about your size and how you dealt with that in your formative years, growing up and going through elementary and high school and things of that nature. I'm wondering if you had challenges back then. How did you get to the point of deciding you wanted to be a Navy SEAL to begin with? Because isn't that, I think that's was in your mind when you enlisted in the Navy to begin with. So how did you come up with that? Because, and I know we're back to this idea of pathological persistence, but that isn't a natural thing for someone who has a challenge. That's not a natural goal for someone to come up with. You wouldn't think of that. So I'm curious about.
It I was always the smallest kid in class, usually smaller than the smallest girl in class. And there's a really important story that I tell in the book is when I was in third grade, I was being picked on, just like today,
Mhm.
kids get picked on, right? I was being picked
Yeah.
on by a big red haired kid, Albert Kita. And he used to call me Shorty Pants, and he used to push me and get to the back of the line. We always lined up by height, right? So I was always the last one in line.
Mhm.
And he would just say, "Get to the back of the line, Shorty Pants." And then after school, he would chase me down and push me. And I didn't know what
Mhm.
to do. And so I went home to my mom crying. And my mother was an Irish woman who didn't take anything from anybody. And when she found out my story, she sat me on her lap and she put her hand up and she had me punch her hand. Like, punch, hey, you're going to do this. Nobody's going to pick on my little boy. You're going to punch him right in the kisser if he does that again. And I give you permission. And I smacked her hand and I started laughing. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to do this." Next day at school, Albert did the same thing. But this time I stood up to him in the alleyway and I punched him right in the
Popped
face.
them.
And then he didn't do anything. He picked me up and he threw me against the garage door. And we went at it just once or twice more. And he said, he put his hands down and he said, "Why are you hitting me?" And I said, "Because you pick on me." And he said, "If I don't pick on you anymore, will you stop punching me?" And I said, "Yeah." And we ended up becoming friends. And
Oh.
this was one of the how to get through problems, how to move to the next level in your life, if you will, is to, it's not enough just to do what your boss says. You set your
Mhm.
goals, right? Every year you go in, you do your evaluation and
Right.
here's your goals. I was like, you could set those goals for me, but my goals are like way up here. You don't even have to tell me what your goals are because mine are going to be way better than those. Life lessons for me, number one, is
Yes.
you got to
Yeah.
stick up for yourself, even if it means fighting. And you don't have to fight. If we had talked it
Mhm.
out, we wouldn't have had to throw any punches. But what that did was that didn't create a fighting personality for me. It was in me. My mom just brought it out. So I had this
Mhm.
kind of this, I'm going to fight my way through life kind of attitude when I didn't even understand or realize it. And moving forward, when I was in high school, you know, you can't win all the time. Sometimes you fail. And I went out, decided to play freshman football in high school. And I was 80 pounds going against
Wow.
150, 200-pound kids. And I got demolished, right? And so
Clobbered.
within a couple weeks, after riding my bike 14 miles to practice and from practice, I decided to quit. I quit football practice. And that was the most devastating event, second most devastating event up until that time. And I almost couldn't overcome it because my personality was telling me, why did you quit? You let yourself down, you let your teammates down. And I got that feeling that I never wanted to quit and I never would quit again after that experience. And so now I'm moving forward and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm a I'm a junior in high school. I think I'm going to go to college to study marine biology. My mom says she's not paying for college. So then I went to the military to start looking in the military. And I wanted to do
Mhm.
exciting stuff. I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau with a machine gun. Actually, I just wanted to be
Mm.
Jacques Cousteau at that time. But I loved James Bond and I loved Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Sea Hunt and all
Oh,
those great shows.
oh,
And
wow.
those were
Yeah, I
things
remember
that
that.
guided me. And there I was in the Coast Guard recruiter, and they wanted to be a swimmer air rescue, is what they told me. So I said, okay, just put it down on paper that I'm going to go to this school. And they wouldn't do it. So I walked down the hallway to the Navy and I went to the Navy recruiter and I had no idea what UDT SEAL was, Underwater Demolition Team SEAL
Mm,
team. And I looked through the book, found the description, no idea. Literally, I did not know what a SEAL was at the time, but it described all the
mm.
things that I always wanted to do when I was a kid. And I said, this is what I want to do. And like I said before, the recruiter said, no way, pick something you can do. You can't do that. And I wouldn't let him dissuade me from going forward with that. I said, no, this is what I'm going to do. I went in the Navy and I passed the test. And I went to Buds
Yeah.
to become a SEAL.
Yeah, and I think you said you broke your legs through the first round, and then you went back to the second class and made it through. Is that
Yeah. One of the things you do when you're going through SEAL training is you run and then you run more. And then after you run more than that, we were running a marathon a week in boots on pavement just to
wow?
run to and from each meal. And then you have running on top of that. I got there early, so I started running before most people. And then within 2 months, I had cracked both of my shins and stress fractures from running. I don't want to say it's typical, but it
Yeah.
does happen to guys. And so right before Hell Week, I don't know if you're familiar with Hell Week, but 2 days before Hell Week, I failed a 4-mile timed run because I was running on 2 broken legs and a
Pain.
pulled groin. And after I failed that, got tested. They told me what was wrong. The review board had me in their office and they said, anybody who can run on 2 broken legs and a pulled groin for 4 miles, you get another shot at this.
Oh,
So I waited 8 weeks and started over, and this time I finished. But there's a lot to unpack in that story, and there goes into great
Oh,
detail
yeah.
in the book. And one particular story that actually changed my life. Everybody who goes through Buds has a life-changing moment. There's some time in there that not everybody's strong at everything. It's either swimming, running, obstacle course, whatever it is. You have to get over that thing that is holding you back. And mine was running. And I kept failing runs and I was fall behind on all the conditioning runs. And I finally had a come to Jesus meeting with myself and whatever great power was under control at the time. I was falling behind on a run and I just told myself I was either going to catch up or I was going to die right there at that time. I was going to run until it killed me, literally. And I had an out of body experience. I ran. I don't even remember doing it. It was like I was looking down on myself. I ran and I caught up to everyone and I never fell behind again. And that is the moment in my life that I realized I could do anything.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've heard other stories about people going through Buds. It's like you said that they have something that they push through that is very similar to that story. Of course, the circumstances are always different, but you had this secret sauce going into it that I think a lot of the people who get up and ring the bell that you would never think would ring the bell just by looking at them on the outside didn't have. And that is you, at a very early age, you discovered this pathological persistence, this I will not quit, period. And I'm willing to go all the way, even to the point of death. And that last example, I'm just not going to quit. And that's probably I would say from an outsider, way outsider looking into these stories, something that seems to be a common thread to all of them is that people don't understand that these physical challenges are one thing, but that's not really what they're looking for ultimately is those physical attributes. They'll get you there. They'll condition you, but you got to have that kind of heart, determination, and pathological persistence to push through, or you'll never make it
And
through.
I'm going to take it one step further. And I don't know if other people have had this comment or suggestion, but it's not enough not to just quit. Not stopping the action that you're doing or the mental challenge is not enough. You have to succeed. If I didn't run fast enough to pass the timed run, if I didn't study enough to pass the test, not quitting doesn't mean you've succeeded. And so
Yeah.
that's a whole nother level of, okay, I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
No, that's not enough.
But
That's
you
what I
still
tell
have to
people. You
get there.
have to be
Yeah.
successful. You have to understand where the finish line is, and you got to get across it in the time that's allotted. I think that's the way you really push through life. And when you look back, you get goosebumps about, wow, I did all these things. And that, if that's what
Yeah.
excites you, that's what makes you the
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
person in the room. Not the
Yeah.
certificate,
Yeah.
not the title.
The other thing you said was you're the one who's doing the assessment. Yeah, there may be this outcome, but you set that goal that you just said beyond what the expectation was of your boss or whatever the situation may be. And ultimately, you're the one that's judging it. It's the competition against yourself. You have to not quit, but then there's this whole second level is you do need to succeed. And then you're the one who measures what the success is. Coming back to where we
Bingo.
started.
Bingo.
Yeah. All right.
This-
Oh, that's gold.
I
Thank
think you've
you.
done this before.
I have bloody knees, so to speak. I've had some measure of success, but I think a lot of us struggle with these things because we haven't. It gets back to people get on sort of a treadmill in life, and it really isn't. The Woody Allen quote, "All 98% of life is showing up," is not really true. It is true, but it's so low of a bar. It's ridiculous because you can show up and you can meet obligations and you can be okay, but is that really the kind of life you want? And so if we don't pay attention, we don't have awareness, we don't do the kind of introspection you're talking about and continually push ourselves forward, I think there's going to be a lot of regret when you get to the end.
And you don't want to be on your deathbed when you have the realization that I could have
Yeah.
done so many other things. You want to be able to be there and say, I've done so many things.
And I think at this point in the conversation, I'll slide in my little philosophy, which is basically that we're all gifted from God above. And part of us reaching that fulfillment is making sure we understand what that gift is and to get it in action and have the kind of determination that we've been discussing and to faithfully steward that gift. But at the end of the day, we can say, well done, we did it.
As I would say, persistence and determination is perseverance. And that's putting it all together. And that's really the goal for me is to persevere, is to get through it. And you need both of those things. You need determination, get rid of that fear, and you need persistence. You just day after day, because when you wake up, let's face it, not everybody wakes up every day. I don't. Oh, I'm a hard charger. I'm going to be 100% today. But it's not the everyday, it's the persistence to push through that feeling where you don't feel like you're going to do it or be 100% that day, and the determination to do it for a long time.
Yeah. Compounds over many days. This has been a great discussion. The last question would be, obviously, the book is out, and I think when we talked before this call, you said it was doing really well on Amazon. So congratulations on that. But looking forward, what are you looking to doing? Is there a new project that we should be looking out for, all the listeners here? Or just get the book?
No, that's a great question. And you pointed out, as everyone else has pointed out when I've told my story about the EPA part, and there's so much unknown about that topic and the things that we did, midnight raids and hurricane and tornadoes warnings and undercover operations. And so my next book is going to be about that. It's going to be about
Oh,
the
wow.
a true crime type of thing. Although I'm going to change a little
Uh-huh.
bit of the. I don't want to have to go through EPA, get permission to write it, the stories that I'm going
Right.
to write. But I think people are going to be completely surprised and amazed at the what is going on in the United States, and it'll be a lot of fun stories to tell about the investigations that I did.
That's awesome. David, thank you so much for being on Titans of Transition. I really appreciate it. If folks want to try to find you, what's the best place for them to look?
Okay, I have a few. I have udtdave.com, which is a website dedicated to me. You can also sign up for information about the book. The book is actually on Amazon and at andgoliathbook.com. And if you want to email me direct, you can email me to udtdave@gmail.com. And I get a lot of great people and great conversations and how they have appreciated the stories and how uplifting the story was and made them feel that much better and wanting to go out and do the thing that they said they were going to do and never did. So it's been
That's
a great
awesome.
experience for me. I get goosebumps just thinking about the fact that it's helping people move on and do things.
That's awesome. That's so cool. All right, I'll put all that information in the show notes to make it easier for all of you listening
Okay.
in. And once again, David, thanks again for being on the
Thank
show.
you for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information.